Welcome back to Rent-Free History, the show about history that lives rent-free in our heads. I'm joined today by Jed Shaffer. Did I get that right? Jed Shaffer?
Yes, you did. Thank you. Most people don't get it right the first time.
Yeah, I've heard that name before, so I don't know if it's pronounced differently at some points or to some degree with some people, but the most often pronunciation I've heard is Shaffer, so.
Yeah. And there's like about 6 different spelling variations of my last name. I have the one that's the most phonetical, uh, which is strange because when people see the non-phonetical ones, they say Schaefer, but when they see mine, uh, they want to say Schaffer. I don't know.
So we're here today to talk a little about video games. And I wanted to, I kind of got into contact with you because you talked about like your love of video games. Where does that come from? Was it like a childhood thing, a teenage thing, and then like how's it kind of change? How's your relationship been with it over the years?
I started playing games as a very young kid. For context, I will be 49 in May. So I've been around for for most of video games lifetime as a form of entertainment, and I have been playing since I was 4 or 5. Back in the days when arcades were common, when you could find arcades in every grocery store and pizza parlor and laundromat on the face of the earth. That's how I started, was playing arcade games, Joust, Moon Patrol, Pac-Man, Space Invaders, stuff like that. And I was always begging my mom, "Hey, can I have quarters? Can I have more quarters?" I always wanted to play more whenever we were somewhere that had an arcade. And after a while, my parents decided, "Hey, if he likes this, why don't we get him a home game console, and maybe that will stop him from asking us for quarters every time we go to the grocery store." It did not. That's just another place to play games. But yeah, my first console was an Intellivision, and I've never since that time, I want to say I got the Intellivision 82 maybe. Um I've never spent a year or day without having a console, and at least one console in my house since then. Um, my gaming has changed over the years. It's a lot easier to game when you're young. When you're 12, you come home, you finish your homework, you game, you eat dinner, you go back to gaming, perfectly fine. When you have a 12-year-old, uh, there are PTA meetings, there's little league games, there's all sorts of things. There's mowing the lawn. There's all the things of adult life creep up on you and take your time. So I don't get to play as much. Um, Perfect example of how s- how much time gets taken away from gaming. I've been playing Baldur's Gate. I am about halfway through, and it's taken me over a year to get to that point. So yeah, I still love gaming. It is always something that there is time in my life. I will find, if I can find the time to do it, I will always sit down and do it. I always enjoy it. There's a never ending supply of games, both modern and retro to play, but it's just something I don't always have the time for anymore.
Yeah, I'm starting to get that a little bit too. I work full time and I work about 9 to 6 every day. And because I want to be like responsible and get to work on time and stuff like that. Like I pretty much like have from 7 to 11 to just 4 hours to just kind of do whatever I want. And that's not like it's nothing. It's 4 hours, but just compared to like what used to be my free time, it's feels like it's shrinking more and more. So I feel like I'm
Hmm.
on that road.
Yeah, it unfortunately, I don't know if once the kids move out, like my older two are 20 almost, so they don't need constant nurturing, and they're out of school, they're living their lives. um it's the younger one, he's 13, so he still has responsibilities that we need to help him achieve. I don't know if it gets better once everyone's older and my time is mine again. but I know right now, I'll probably be working on Baldur's Gate and through next year. So,
I hope you
yeah,
finish it eventually.
one day before I die, one day.
Yeah, my relationship with video games has been kind of interesting too. Was more of like an observer of like I had like friends and cousins who had like gaming systems before I did. My first thing was like one of those like kind of preschool type devices. It was called a VTech,
Hmm.
and I had that for maybe a year or two, and then I got the Nintendo DS, the light, not the old one that had the awkward little clamshell thing where it didn't close fully all the way. And that was a lot of fun. I got a DSi. My family, we got the Wii that I would play a lot of Wii games and occasionally GameCube games on. I got the PS4, um, maybe like 12 years ago, and I had that forever until it just stopped working one day. And then I planned to get a PS5, but uh, I didn't know if it was worth the investment since I just don't play video games as much as I used to. Oh, I also have a Switch, but so I do play on that occasionally. But yeah, I actually recently got a PS3 to get back into gaming, and I was planning on having someone mod it with like old games to see if like that would kind of rekindle my interest, but kind of been putting that off. So we'll only
If I
see.
if I were to list all my consoles, I'm not even sure. Let's see. Television, Atari 5200, original Nintendo, Sega Genesis, Sega CD, Sega Saturn, PlayStation 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. My wife had a GameCube. Family had a Wii. Still have the Wii. Still have the PS3 and the PS5. Have a Switch. Also have an analog pocket. Have it here on my
Oh,
desk.
is that one of the new ones? I've been really
Yeah.
interested in getting one of
I think
those.
it's a model. The model's a couple of years old, but still, um, absolutely fantastic little handheld device. Plays, it emulates everything from Atari 2600 up to the fourth generation. So TurboGrafx 16, Sega Genesis, Super Nintendo. Um, and also back on my entertainment center back there, I've got a Polymega, which is it's a Linux based emulator, but it's like really really high tech. It's very expensive. It can run original cartridges, but it's got like these these modules, I should say, where you can if you get there, each one is separate. So there's one for NES, there's one for Super Nintendo, there's one for Genesis. But the base plays CD games, and you can play like Sega CD, Neo Geo CD, Saturn, TurboGrafx 16 CD, and PlayStation 1. So I've got frankly an irresponsible amount of games, and I've had way too many systems. Just like if I had them all, I would have one of those like massive IKEA cabinets with, like 15 different cubbies for each one of them. And my wife would probably kill me.
Speaking of killing, wanted to parlay this into the topic of today's episode. When the video game industry seemed to kind of kill itself and kind of collapse on itself at one point. And we, of course, are referring to the crash of 1983. Now, you mentioned before that, arcades were, a lot more popular around the 70s and 80s. And, they weren't niche spaces. They were like cultural hubs. There were games like Space Invaders and then Pac-Man, and which, was the bigger cultural phenomenon, because they got merchandise, they got cartoons, they got hit songs, lunchboxes. They were realizing there's some real money to be made off these things. And, arcades are generating billions in revenue. and companies are asking this next question: what if there was some way you could, bring this elsewhere, like the way your parents also thought? What if we just buy him a console or an arcade machine that you could take home? Therein is the home console. Now, the first home console was the Magnavox Odyssey, which was released in 1972.
Hmm.
Now, I know a lot about this console from like just like videos I've seen because I've never actually played this one. But it seemed to be a sort of Pong insert console where you could play like just Pong if you wanted to, but then you would put like these, I guess, like program cards into the system. Like there's one called soccer, there's one called golf. I might be completely wrong. I don't remember any of the names of the cards, but I just remember it was game. It was stuff like that. You'd put them in, and then the programs would load, and you would put like different screens on top of your TV, and then that was how you'd control them. I don't know if you ever used a Magnavox before.
I never have had the opportunity. I've seen them in retro game stores, rarely, because most of them, I think the surviving Odysseys are now all in the hands of collectors. But I've never had the opportunity to play one. But I, like you, I most of what I know about them is videos and articles, and you're pretty much bang on. It was pretty much a Pong machine, and each of the different cards that you put in really didn't change that much. The Odyssey was really only capable, I think what I heard was it was capable of displaying two dots in a line. So the card really only manipulated the positioning of those. So, for soccer, the line would be, instead of in the center, it would be moved over to the left or the right to simulate a goal. And for, I don't know what it would do for golf, frankly, but I can't even imagine how that would work. But that's all the cards did, was just reposition those things so that way, instead of Pong, it was now soccer or hockey or whatever. And yeah, that was where it all started. But it is so far removed from, even from the console generation that followed it. Like, it didn't have interchangeable cartridges really. The programming was built into the console. It was it was caveman drawings compared to Picasso's.
Yeah, it also really just makes me think, like, wow, 70s just like somewhat of a bummer. This comes out, everyone's like, it's a shame about Nixon, but at least we got this new video game. Oh, well, this is gonna be fun for a couple weeks, I guess.
But it kept people occupied though, because I mean, they
Yeah,
didn't have anything else to compare it to.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah, it wasn't like it was TV or play Pong. It's not. Space Invaders didn't come out for another 6 years, I think. So yeah,
in 76. I think it's either 75 or 76. Um, a breakthrough happens. There's finally something to compare it to because Atari essentially helps to create the commercial video game industry when they release the Atari 2600. And the breakthrough with this thing isn't the graphics or anything. It isn't the box, which is a very nice, very well designed box. Like I wish,
yeah,
yeah, like
beautiful console.
beautiful. But it's the interchangeable cartridges because you didn't have to buy a new machine for every game like an arcade, and it wasn't something as primitive as the Magnavox Odyssey. You could just kind of swap your experiences instantly, and there's something just like groundbreaking about that. And you know, they're really like they become more of like a software based company instead of like building the arcade cabinets. They're more focusing on like making the games. Like someone, of course, is gonna make the console, but there's a point where like consoles are lasting a lot longer than like their lifespan is nowadays. Where average console lifespan nowadays is probably about 4 or 5 years before we move on to the next one. I mean, you might have some outliers like PlayStation 2, which, I mean, PlayStation 3 was still out and they were still making PlayStation 2 games until about 2014. Game system came out in 2000. But most of them nowadays last about like 5 years max before they're already moving on to the next one. Uh, but 2600, this lasted from about 75, 76 until I would say 82 or 83 when the sequel came out, the 5200. And
Well,
along with
actually,
that, oh, sorry.
they were still releasing new games for it up until like 89, I believe. Yeah. I mean, it wasn't of the steady flood. It was,
Yeah, yeah.
from the console's release in the late 70s to the crash, it was just a constant stream of things. Whereas after that, it was here's 5 or 6 games a year. Um, but yeah, it had an insanely long lifespan.
Yeah. I often think about that with like other consoles because there are some um that like release games like far later than you would expect. Like for example, the Sega Dreamcast. I know the Sega Dreamcast is very popular with like homebrew developers, and like there's still games being released for that system. Um, and I know like support used to last a lot longer. Like the original Nintendo Entertainment System, that was still you could still like call in to get repairs for that thing until like the mid to late 90s when there were
Yeah,
like 3 consoles later.
this will blow your mind. Homebrew. You know what console has an amazingly vibrant homebrew community that you would not expect? The Atari Jaguar.
Really?
Yes. They have, if you do some digging, go into like the Atari Age forums, or just search Atari Jaguar homebrew, there is a constant stream of homebrew games coming out for the Jaguar. They're a small fan base, but they are a loud, dedicated one. I don't know why. Maybe just to be defiant and make sure that the thing has a better epilogue than it did in an original story. I don't know.
Well, I always thought it was interesting how, because they had a CD add-on. I love that the CD add-on kind of looked like a toilet. Like it made the
Yeah.
whole thing look like a toy. I thought that was so funny.
Oh, Atari after the 2600 is a. I mean, well, we're going to be talking about that here shortly. Atari after the
Yeah,
2600 was they made some decisions.
yeah. Well, the company at the time was actually, well, it was run by this guy Nolan Bushnell, at least until 1980. And actually, no, 79, when he was like forced out of the company because they just didn't like how he was running things. And he was able to be forced out because they were public, they had stock and they were owned by Warner Communications. Depending on when you're uh, watching this, Warner Brothers has just been bought by Paramount, so that's the thing. So don't worry, I'm sure by the time this episode comes out, they'll be bought by someone else. There'll just be one big company. So
Warner,
yeah,
Disney, uh, Paramount, something.
yeah, I can't wait to like watch a show on the one streaming service, and then it's just like 12 different logos all at the same. But their revenue at the time with this is about 2 billion, and this is when they get into their stock market or their 1929 Roaring Twenties era, where they're just kind of throwing all caution to the wind. This is their third party explosion era. So a problem with Atari is that they're not being properly credited for the games that they're making. Like they don't really get credits. Like their credit is just to Atari. Like they don't get their names labeled as like working on the game. So you could spend all your time on this and then just no credit at all. So there's no way you can like, help get work as a result from that. And even worse is that they're not being properly compensated. So, you know, I myself, hey, I don't get the credit, at least give me money. But they're not getting the money that they need for either.
So there was
And
at the time there was a memo that got leaked, or not leaked. One of the programmers, David Crane, who went on to help found Activision, he had gotten a hold of a financial memo that showed the sales for I don't remember if it was the past year or the past quarter, and it showed that Atari had made $20 million off of the games that he had worked on. Just his alone. He was able to go, I worked on that and that and that and that, and figured out those games made $20 million. His salary was 20,000. And he went to the CEO, Ray Kassar, and said, "Can we get credit? Can we get profit sharing?" And he was told in no uncertain terms, I believe the quote was, "You are no more important to the making of a video game than the people on the line who put together the cartridge." And him and three other programmers whose names escape me at the moment, they figured out in 1979 that they were responsible for 60% of the games that were sold by Atari that made profit. Four guys were responsible for more than half, almost two-thirds. And Atari's response was, "Thank you, pat on the head. Here's your pittance. Make me another." And that's why Activision happened. They split off and were like, "Fine, we'll do it ourselves and we'll make our own money," and profit sharing and royalties. And Atari didn't like that quite a lot, and they filed a lawsuit. And that was the first domino in the crash, was the four developers leaving, because that that whole situation with Activision and the lawsuit, when the lawsuit was resolved, it 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 didn't go, I mean, it kind of went in both favor. Activision was allowed to exist. They had to pay Atari royalties, but they could freely make games for it for the 2600. And that made a whole bunch of other entities go, well, if they can do it, we can do it. And Atari had no checkpoint, no quality control, no nothing. That's that was the first, that, like, it wasn't a sequence of events that caused the crash so much as it was like bullets coming from multiple sides. And that was bullet number one, was the third party explosion without having a mechanism in place to gatekeep those third parties. Because that's how you get games made by dog food companies like Chase the Chuck Wagon. That's how you get games by uh oh
it's a
god,
game.
yeah, the Pepsi game, the
Space
Kool-Aid,
Invaders Clown, yeah.
yeah, the Kool-Aid Man game, the game, and what's the name of it? I think it's Cavity Busters. It's basically like a Space Invaders clone, but you're in a mouth and you're like protecting teeth and you're shooting at plaque. It's how you get the Swedish erotica games or the unlicensed horror games like Halloween and Texas Chainsaw. It, no one was there to go, okay, but are these games worth it? And when you get good games and bad games on the shelf and you can't tell the difference between either one, that's going to be a problem.
All these companies with zero game experience. It's like a video game gold rush, essentially. There's no safeguards, no approval system, no minimum quality, no limits. So they're just kind of shooting them out. And like you said, market saturation.
And no media either. It's not like, anyone right now can pull up their phone and go to the website of your choice, IGN, Polygon, whatever, and look up a review for any game that you can think of, in from some obscure indie game to the latest AAA title. But back then, there wasn't even a magazine for video games. No one was reviewing them. So every game was a roll of dice. How do you know that Yar's Revenge is actually going to be better than Chase the Chuck Wagon. You don't. You're just going to have to spend $30 and take a gamble. And when you have quantity, when quantity rules the day, quality falls away. You're more than likely going to be wasting $30 more often than you're getting your money's worth.
Consoles too. You know, there's a lot of consoles out there as well. Not just
God, yes.
the Atari and its many variants, but you also got, as you mentioned previously, the Intellivision. There's also the ColecoVision. And then there's a lot of like early home computers that are being marketed as gaming machines. Everything has different games because they're all making different games for all these different systems. Nothing's compatible. Parents don't know what to buy. And big problem is publishers assumed demand was infinite. There was for Pac-Man. So Atari, this is one of Atari's more bigger fuck ups where with Pac-Man, this I can't remember the programmer's name, but he basically made a demo for Pac-Man because that was a very popular game, and everyone knew it was going to be big once it came to consoles. And he's like, "Here's the demo. Let me know when you want me to finish the full game." And they're like, "Oh, we don't. Um, so we're just gonna take this and we're gonna release it." And we're also going to make more copies of the game than there are consoles out that we have sold because we know that once people see this demo buggy version of Pac-Man, that they are definitely want to go out there and buy an Atari Coleca and television. You know, they're gonna
Mm-hmm.
buy that. So
Yeah, it was a huge mistake on Atari's part. That is another bullet in what caused the crash was Atari's hubris. They really thought we can do no wrong. We have momentum on our side. Who's, ColecoVision. I wrote down some notes about sales. So there were So the Atari 2600, 30 million sold lifetime, and television, 3 million sold, Coleco, 2 million, the Odyssey 2, 2 million, the Atari 5200, 1 million, the Fairchild Channel F, 350,000, and then three or four more consoles that had no sales figures known. That's a lot of consoles, but Atari did have the lead, and they figured we'll always have the lead, we'll always gain more. They didn't see that, like you said, there was not infinite growth. There was a finite amount of people who would ever buy it because at the time, video gaming was kids stuff. Adults weren't playing it. Or if they were, it was like, okay, cute. 5 minutes. I played Space Invaders. That was fun. Here you go, Junior. Played, have fun. Yeah. And so they thought, like you said, they thought Pac-Man would lure people in to buy the console. It didn't. They thought they could put anything out and it would be magic because it had Atari's name on it, and it wasn't. CET.
yep, probably the most famous symbol of the crash because
Yes.
you know E.T. the movie comes out in '82, and Atari pays this enormous licensing fee for the rights, and this guy Scott Warshaw, he had made like successful titles. They were good games,
Hmm.
on buggy games, and unfortunately, he's given just like 5 weeks to finish development on a. I could not imagine get because you know I've never made a game before. Well, I made like point and click stuff like on like for like a class before, but it wasn't anything like that like good. And I cannot imagine being given 5 weeks to like do something like that. And it was just impossible to like fix. I watched this documentary called Game Over, which was talking more about it, and he basically says that yeah, I like gave my pitch to Steven Spielberg. He's like, okay, do it. And then like I remember 4 weeks in, like I showed him the demo, and he's like, oh, well, that's a video game. You know, that's what he said. And I can't remember if it was E.T. or Pac-Man, but one of them they paid them in advance Like they were getting paid in advance based off the amount of cartridges that were going to be ordered. So no matter what, they were getting paid. So that just kind of like makes you lose motivation as much because you're not motivated as much to create a great game, and then you don't have that much time. You're kind of just like, all right, forget this, just whatever, you know. Players, when the game finally came out, they struggled to understand like what you were supposed to be doing. Everything felt awkward. The progress was confusing, but millions of cartridges were shipped, and then millions came back, and it cost them tens of millions of dollars. And well, they started taking all this stuff because they didn't know what to do with it. I just think that I don't know if you've seen that one SpongeBob clip where they're talking about like a bunch of money that they have, and just like, yeah, we don't know what to do with it, so we started burning it, burying it,
Mhm.
and yeah,
Yep.
that clip. And that's basically what they did with all their cartridges. They just like excavated or excavated a landfill and just started dumping not just ET, but just like all of their stuff that they like could not sell, or they were getting like returned, and they buried it in this New Mexico landfill. And you know, just perfect metaphor for them burying their own excess.
There's a museum here where I live in Detroit, that I wanna say I don't know if they still have it now, but it was about 10 years ago that I went there. They had some of the games and the dirt from the Alamogordo dig site in a case that you could see, a crushed copy of Combat and Yar's Revenge and ET and some of the dirt that it was buried in. And it was really surreal to see it, to realize, I mean, because up until they did the dig, it was this myth of, hey, they buried all these games in the desert out of shame. And like to really see it and go, oh no, they did it. They had to literally bury the evidence of their failure. It's astounding. It was really bizarre. Something else to go along with that business failure too, something that I've heard, or I mean, I know it happened. It doesn't get talked about a lot though, is that at the end of 1982, uh, the first warning signs were going off. The Atari put out a quarterly report and showed that their profits were starting to come down, and that they were forecasting probably a downgrade for 1983, that they were going to continue to go down. And in that memo, it mentions how one of their business policies was that Atari was telling retailers, you can't order on the fly. You can't be like, okay, it's April and I need, 50 copies of Adventure or whatever it may be. They said you have to order all of your games ahead of time. You have to place your 1983 orders in the end of 1982, and no takebacks, no nothing. You want 5,000 games over the course of the year? We need your orders now. So they were expecting basically places like Toys R Us and KB Toys and Sears and whoever else was carrying video games to blindly trust that the games that were going to be shipped were going to be worth it. And that's when they start dumping that really shitty Pac-Man game that flickers like, like a disco light. ET, which it's a miracle it's playable at all. You know, and any other number of games that came out that were just as wonky and buggy. Uh, Again, more Atari hubris of assuming you're always going to want us just because our name. By 83, people were showing no, and retailers even were showing no, you're not worth it. You're really beginning to not be worth the shelf space in our store.
Yeah. Um, and the four like main points we've already covered: oversupply, retail panic, a $40 game dropping to $5, which if I had a time machine, I would love to go back to these times where like these consoles were not doing well and just kind of scoop them all up for less
Mhm.
than 100. A loss of confidence due to quality going down, and then competition from home computers, which is something also because why buy a console when it can just do one thing when a home computer you can use that for office work and or home office work and then also video games, and actual consoles seem limited. But
Yeah, Commodore
um
64 comes out in,
yes.
I want to say it was 82 or somewhere around that neighborhood. And by 83, they're selling it for like 400 bucks. Texas Instruments is selling basic computers for that much. So is Tandy. So is IBM at that point. They're dropping entry level stuff to that around that price point. And like you said, you can send your kid to college with an Atari 2600 and he's not going to get his work done, or you can send him with a Commodore 64. He can do his homework, he can learn to program, and yeah, he can play games too. And you've only spent maybe an extra 100 or 200 bucks at most, but he's got a versatile machine versus a toy, because that's what they were seen as at the time, a toy.
So as you said before, game revenue fell totally, like, massive. Like, it goes from between 83 and 85, between 3.2 billion to under 100 million. Major companies folded, massive losses reported. Thousands of workers lost their job. Retailers are concluding video games are just a passing fad, and many stopped carrying them entirely.
Mm-hmm.
And people start to think, "Oh, is this the end? Is this just another thing? Are they going the way of the dodo bird?" But then something else happens. There's it's like that moment in episode 5 when Luke's going away, and everyone's like, "He's our last hope," and Yoda goes, "No, there is another." And then cue Nintendo. Nintendo has this console called the Family Computer, but entering America is a bit difficult, and they kind of re-engineer it, and they call it the Nintendo Entertainment System. Originally, Atari was actually going to distribute it, and they had a bit of a falling out, which is probably the reason Atari isn't around nowadays. I really think they could have used that
Yeah.
because yeah, I think it did okay. I think the Nintendo Entertainment System. I think it sold a couple units, so I think
Yeah,
that would have helped.
they kept its head above water. It did
Yeah.
all right. But yeah, Nintendo really, through very savvy marketing, and let's be fair, a couple underhanded ideas. Their third party licensing agreements were um
Mafia
practically
strong arming. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, they were. Third parties were held hostage, more or less. You can't make more than 5 games a year. You can't have them anywhere on any other console. Um, that was draconian. It was, but it worked. It's unfortunate that it worked, but it worked. But through naming it the Nintendo Entertainment System to get it away from video games, packaging Rob with the system to go, look, it's a toy. It's not a video game. It's got a robot that only goes back and forth very slowly and drops a little top. The Nintendo seal of approval, which was complete and utter bullshit. Um, People are like, "Oh, it was the sign of quality." No, it wasn't. Have you seen some of the games that are on NES? That wasn't a sign of quality. Jekyll and Hyde got on there. Friday the 13th got on there. Mega Man. I mean, I love Mega Man, but that first game is riddled with bugs. Don't tell me that seal of quality meant anything other than, yeah, they paid the licensing dues. But it still worked. It still instilled confidence. It still rebuilt the market and got video games out of the darkest period that they had ever been in. That they still to this day, they've never been in a place like they were from 83 to 85.
Yeah. And then one other thing that changed is how they were marketed to people. Because previously video games were in the electronics section, but they thought, they're a bit precarious putting it back in the entertainment section or the electronics section or entertainment section because they thought I don't know if this will work. So when they're marketing the NES, they decided we can either put it in the boys section or the girls section, and they decided the boys section. That kind of changed the perception of how people thought like video games were for boys, video games aren't for girls, and it took a while to get that stigma.
Mhm.
And yeah, I think we're kind of out of that nowadays. I feel like everyone just plays video games if they play video games. It's not really like a gender thing anymore. And I think I just want to cover, sum up at a few last points before we close. So modern gaming kind of still operates over these rules from 1983, kind of certifying everything with like seals of approval, even though, of course, it doesn't mean anything. Developer licensing, hardware standards, and we've kind of buffered out all these like 7 to 12 different consoles that were out in the 80s. We're down to just 3 really, and then maybe like a close fourth. We've got Nintendo, we've got Xbox. Well, not sure for how much longer to be honest, but and then we've
Sony.
also got PlayStation. But we've also got some like some fourth cousins. We've got their Steam machines. We've got Google Stadia. They're trying. Damn it, they're trying. But um, yeah, and the whole kind of message is just like you got to care or else your consumer won't care, about what you do.
And it, there's something interesting too in that a lot of those rules that the post crash things that kind of stabilize the market are still around. But there is something to be said about how we have almost come full circle in the mentality of anyone can play or anyone can make a game anymore. I mean, we no longer have rando companies like Ralston Purina or the Kool-Aid company making video games, but you go on to Steam or Epic, or even you go on to the console eShops, and there is some straight up garbo on there that has no business being sold to a human being in uh, these days. Stuff like
Especially for
Life
the
of Black,
prices.
yeah, stuff like Life of Black Tiger or Vroom in the Night Sky. Um, there's a whole host of games on PlayStation and Xbox, and I would assume Steam as well, that are specifically designed to get people a metric ton of achievements in like 30 minutes. Like you just sit there and you hit the X button over and over and over again, or you let it sit idle or something, and you go from no trophies to the platinum trophy in like an hour. So we've come full circle in the sense that, okay, now the market is open, it's democratized where anyone with a dev kit and some time on their hands can make, or some basic programming language knowledge can make a game, but that leads to a metric ton of shovelware again. And the game companies don't really gatekeep it all that much anymore because there's no incentive to.
Not sure where the future of video games is heading. Just 2 rivalries down to, or still at 3. Maybe Sega will come back. Who knows? But
I wish.
yeah,
I the kid in me will always love Sega for being. I mean, they were the weirdest console manufacturer. They were so against the grain, not in a Nintendo cutesy. Uh, Nintendo's kind of like Disney or Apple, where they're this own island that do things their way like nobody else. But Sega was like the weird artsy kid that just they tried hard at everything. They were often a mess, but they were a fascinating mess. I would love for that to come back. Uh, I don't know that there's room for them, but it would be nice.
All right. I think we can end things here. I feel it was a really good discussion on video games, just like your history, my history with video games, and then just kind of how things fall apart sometimes. And yeah, thank you again for agreeing to be on this episode. I really
Yeah.
appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. It's been fun.
All right. Thank you to everyone who listened to this episode. If you like this, check out more on Rent Free History and more on the Culture Clubhouse. Thank you.